My name is Eleanor, and at 73, I thought I'd seen every shade of cruelty this world had to offer. I was wrong. The deepest cut came from the one place I believed was safe, my own son's home, where I'd been living for 2 years after my husband Harold passed away. I remember the day I moved in with Michael and his wife Jessica like it was yesterday. The autumn leaves were turning gold in suburban Connecticut, and I carried only 2 suitcases and Harold's old rocking chair. "It's temporary, Mom," Michael had said, his eyes avoiding mine. "Just until you get back on your feet." But grief doesn't follow timelines, and my feet felt like they were stuck in quicksand. Jessica had smiled that day, the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. Her house was a monument to modern minimalism. White walls, glass tables, and not a single family photo in sight. Everything had its place, and apparently, I didn't have one. For 2 years, I tried to make myself invisible. I cooked quietly, cleaned without being asked, and spent most of my time in the small guest room that smelled of lavender air freshener instead of home. I watched my daughter-in-law rearrange furniture around me like I was an obstacle, heard her whispered phone calls about the situation with her mother. I contributed to groceries, helped with utilities, and never complained when she moved my few belongings to make room for her endless deliveries of decorative objects. I was grateful, I told myself. Grateful to have a roof over my head, grateful that my son hadn't abandoned me completely. But gratitude has a way of curdling when it's mixed with contempt. And Jessica's contempt for me grew stronger each day, like mold in a damp corner. She'd sigh dramatically when I used the kitchen, roll her eyes when I watched my evening programs, and speak about me in third person even when I was sitting right there. "She really clashes with the whole vibe we've created," I heard her tell her friend Sarah one afternoon. "It's like having a yard sale in the middle of a gallery." I should have known that morning would be different. Jessica was pacing around the living room with her phone, taking pictures of every corner, muttering about content and brand consistency. She'd started some sort of lifestyle blog, turning our daily life into performance art for strangers on the internet. That's when she looked at me, really looked at me, sitting in Harold's rocking chair with my morning coffee and crossword puzzle. Her face changed, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. What happened next would shatter what was left of my heart and change everything I thought I knew about family, dignity, and the power of an underestimated old woman. The morning sun was streaming through Jessica's pristine windows when she approached me with that look, the one I'd learned to fear over the past 2 years. I was sitting in Harold's rocking chair, the only piece of my old life that had made the journey to this sterile house. "Eleanor, we need to talk," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when discussing household inconveniences. I set down my coffee cup, the one with the chip on the handle that she'd complained about countless times. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photos, pictures of the living room, the kitchen, even the hallway. In every single one, I was visible in the background, reading, cooking, simply existing. "I'm launching my lifestyle brand next week," she announced, as if this explained everything. "I've got sponsors interested, real money coming in, but..." She gestured vaguely in my direction. "You're in every shot. Your chair, your things, even you. It's not the aesthetic I'm going for." The words hit me like a physical blow. I don't understand." "Look, Eleanor, you're a sweet old lady, but you don't fit the image I'm creating. My followers want to see modern elegance, not..." She paused, searching for words that would cut deep enough. "Not a nursing home vibe." I felt Harold's presence in that moment, felt his hand on my shoulder like he used to do when the world got too heavy. "This is my home too, Jessica." Michael said. "Michael isn't here," she interrupted. "He's in Chicago on business for 3 weeks. And honestly, he agrees with me. We've talked about this. You need to find somewhere else to live." The room started spinning. 2 years of walking on eggshells, of making myself small, of swallowing every insult. And this was how it ended. Not with a family discussion, not with help finding a new place, but with a demand to disappear for the sake of her Instagram feed. "Where am I supposed to go?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. She shrugged, already turning away. "There are nice senior communities around here. You'll make friends your own age. It'll be better for everyone." That's when she said the words that would echo in my mind for weeks. "I've already called a moving company. They'll be here Thursday to pack your things. I'm sorry, Eleanor, but you're ruining everything I've worked for." I sat there in Harold's chair, watching my daughter-in-law walk away like she'd just discussed the weather. The house felt colder somehow, the walls closing in around me. For the first time in 2 years, I allowed myself to cry. Not the quiet tears I'd shed in my room, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place I'd kept locked away. But as I sat there, something else began to stir. Something that had been sleeping since Harold died. Something that remembered who Eleanor Morrison used to be before grief made her small. I thought about the phone call I'd need to make, the conversation that would change everything. You see, there was something Jessica didn't know about the sweet old lady she was so eager to discard. What would you do in my place? Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who give us the greatest gift, the motivation to remind them exactly who they're dealing with. The 3 days that followed Jessica's ultimatum passed like a fever dream. I moved through the house like a ghost, packing my life into boxes, while she continued her daily routine of photographing breakfast bowls and arranging flowers for her content. I called Michael 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Michael Morrison. I'm currently traveling for business." The automated cheerfulness of his voice felt like mockery. On the 7th attempt, I left a message that surprised even me with its steadiness. "Son, your wife has asked me to leave. I thought you should know." He never called back. The moving company arrived exactly when Jessica said they would, Thursday at 9 a.m. sharp. 2 young men with kind eyes and careful hands wrapped Harold's rocking chair in blankets like they were handling something precious. One of them, a boy who couldn't have been older than 25, kept apologizing. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? Seems like a nice place to live," he said, glancing around the pristine living room. I almost laughed. Nice for whom? Jessica supervised the packing with the efficiency of someone disposing of unwanted furniture. She even had the audacity to offer me a glass of water, playing the role of gracious hostess for the movers' benefit. "Eleanor's moving to a lovely senior community," she announced. "She's so excited for this new chapter." The lie sat between us like broken glass. That night, I sat in a budget motel room 6 miles away, surrounded by boxes and the overwhelming scent of industrial cleaning products. The walls were beige, the carpet was brown, and the air conditioner rattled like Harold's old truck. I'd paid for a week, hoping it would give me time to figure out what came next. I opened my laptop, the one Michael had given me for my 70th birthday, insisting I needed to stay connected. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I made a phone call that I should have made years ago. "Morrison Holdings, this is Patricia speaking." "Patricia, it's Eleanor Morrison. I need to speak with James." There was a pause. "Mrs. Morrison? Oh my goodness, it's been so long. Mr. Whitfield will be so pleased to hear from you. Hold on just one moment." James Whitfield had been Harold's business partner for 37 years. When Harold died, I'd signed papers giving James full control of their real estate investment company. I couldn't bear to think about business when I could barely think about breathing. "Just handle everything," I'd told him. "I trust you." "Eleanor," James's voice boomed through the phone. "Where have you been hiding? I've been sending reports to your son's address for 2 years." "I never saw any reports, James." Another pause, longer this time. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Are you sitting down?" For the next hour, James explained what I'd been too grief-stricken to understand 2 years ago. Harold hadn't just left me his love and his rocking chair. He'd left me half of an empire. Morrison Holdings owned commercial properties across 3 states, residential developments, and a portfolio that had grown substantially since Harold's death. "You're worth approximately $47 million, Eleanor. You're one of the wealthiest women in Connecticut, and you've been living like a charity case," I finished. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in that motel room, looking out at the parking lot where Jessica's neighborhood was just visible in the distance, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. I felt powerful. The sweet old lady who'd been grateful for scraps was gone. What rose in her place was someone Jessica had never met, the woman who'd built a business empire alongside her husband, who'd made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, who'd forgotten her own strength in the fog of grief. Tomorrow, I would start remembering who Eleanor Morrison really was. And Jessica was about to learn that some people are dangerous precisely because they've been underestimated for so long. The game was about to change, and I was finally ready to play. I woke up in that motel room with a clarity I hadn't felt since Harold's funeral. The morning light filtering through the thin curtains seemed brighter somehow, full of possibility instead of endings. My first call was to James. I want to see everything, I told him. Every property, every investment, every detail Harold and I built together. Eleanor, are you sure you're ready for this? James, I've been ready for 2 years. I just forgot. By noon, I was sitting in the conference room of Morrison Holdings, surrounded by files and photographs of properties I'd forgotten I owned. Strip malls in Hartford, apartment complexes in New Haven, office buildings in Stamford. Harold and I had started with a single duplex 45 years ago, and somehow, while I was playing the grateful houseguest, our empire had grown beyond my wildest dreams. This one might interest you, James said, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. Maple Ridge Development. We acquired it last year when the previous owner defaulted on their loans. I opened the folder and felt my heart skip. Aerial photographs showed a pristine suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and perfect lawns. At the center of the development was a familiar street name, Harmony Lane, Jessica's Street, Jessica's entire neighborhood. We own this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Every house, every lot, every blade of grass, James confirmed. The previous developer went bankrupt during construction. We bought it all for pennies on the dollar. Most of the residents don't even know they're renting from us. The property management company handles everything. I studied the photos more carefully. There was Jessica's house with its perfect white exterior and manicured garden. There was the playground where she took her aesthetic photos. There was the community center where she hosted her book club, always making sure to mention how exclusive their neighborhood was. What are the rental terms? I asked. James pulled out another file. Most are on year-to-year leases, a few month-to-month arrangements for newer residents. He paused, studying my face. Eleanor, what are you thinking? What was I thinking? I was thinking about 2 years of being treated like an inconvenience. I was thinking about being called a nursing home vibe. I was thinking about my son's silence and my daughter-in-law's cruelty. I was thinking about Harold's voice saying, Ellie, sometimes the best revenge is simply being successful. I want to move back to the neighborhood, I said. James raised an eyebrow. Any particular house? I pointed to a large colonial at the end of Harmony Lane, directly across from Jessica's pristine modern fortress. That one. How quickly can we make it happen? It's currently vacant. We could have you moved in by tomorrow if you wanted. I want. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and arrangements. Interior designers, moving companies, landscapers, all mobilized with the efficiency that only money can buy. I selected furniture that was elegant but comfortable, artwork that spoke to my soul instead of someone else's aesthetic, and flowers for a garden that would bloom in colors Jessica would probably call chaotic. As the sun set over Connecticut, I stood in the empty house that would become my new home, looking out the front window at Jessica's house across the street. The lights were on in her living room, and I could see her moving around, probably arranging props for tomorrow's photo shoot. She had no idea that her new neighbor was the woman she'd discarded like yesterday's newspaper. She had no idea that the sweet old lady she'd underestimated now held the deed to her perfect little world. I thought about calling Michael, about trying one more time to reach my son. But some bridges burn themselves, and sometimes the ashes make better fertilizer than the original wood. Tomorrow, Jessica would wake up to find that her carefully curated world had a new variable, one she couldn't control, couldn't photograph, and definitely couldn't dismiss. I was Eleanor Morrison, and I was coming home. What would you do in my place? Sometimes the best way to handle people who try to erase you is to become impossible to ignore. And I was about to become very, very visible. Moving day arrived with the efficiency of a military operation. By 8 a.m., trucks were lined up outside my new home on Harmony Lane, and by noon, I was officially Jessica's neighbor. I watched from my new living room window as she peeked through her blinds, probably wondering who could afford to move in so quickly to the most expensive house on the street. The irony was delicious. Here I was, settling into a home 3 times the size of hers, with a view of her backyard and all her carefully staged outdoor photo shoots. I'd chosen furniture that was elegant but lived in, the kind of pieces that spoke of old money rather than Instagram trends. Persian rugs instead of stark white floors, mahogany bookshelves filled with actual books, and Harold's rocking chair positioned perfectly by the front window. But the real work was just beginning. That afternoon, I called James with a list of requests that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. I want to renovate the community center, I told him. New kitchen, updated technology, maybe a small theater for movie nights. That's a wonderful idea, Eleanor. The residents will love it. Oh, and I want to host a neighborhood welcome party. Something elegant, catered by that French restaurant downtown. What's it called? Le Bernardin? The one that requires reservations 6 months in advance? That's the one. Money talks, James. Make it happen. The invitations went out that evening, hand-delivered by a courier service to every house on Harmony Lane. Cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. Eleanor Morrison cordially invites you to a neighborhood welcome celebration at the Harmony Lane Community Center. Saturday evening, cocktails at 7. I watched Jessica retrieve her invitation from the mailbox, saw her face change as she read it. She stood there for a full minute, staring at the card like it might burst into flames. Then she looked directly at my house, and for a moment, our eyes met through the window. She didn't wave. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Florists transformed the community center into something from a fairy tale. The caterers arrived with enough champagne to float a yacht and hors d'oeuvres that looked like tiny works of art. I'd hired a string quartet, the same one that played at the governor's mansion. But the real masterstroke was the guest list. Along with the Harmony Lane residents, I'd invited some of Connecticut's most prominent citizens, the mayor and his wife, several state legislators, the president of the country club where Jessica had been trying to get membership for 2 years, the editor of Connecticut Living magazine, who happened to be an old friend from my charity board days. Saturday evening arrived crisp and clear. I dressed carefully in a navy Chanel suit that had been hanging in my closet since Harold's funeral, paired with the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw Eleanor Morrison, not the grateful houseguest, but the woman who'd co-built an empire. The community center was transformed. Soft lighting, elegant music, and the kind of atmosphere that money couldn't buy, only taste and experience could create. The guests began arriving at 7 sharp, and I positioned myself near the entrance to greet everyone personally. Eleanor Morrison, I introduced myself to each newcomer, watching their faces change as they recognized the name. Morrison Holdings was well known in Connecticut circles, and suddenly, the mysterious new neighbor became someone worth knowing. Jessica arrived at 7:30, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but somehow managed to look like she was trying too hard. She'd brought Michael's cousin David and his wife as backup, probably hoping to blend into the crowd. But there was no blending tonight. This was my stage, and I'd been preparing for this performance for 73 years. "Jessica," I called out warmly, crossing the room with the grace of someone who'd attended 1,000 such events. "How wonderful that you could make it. I was so hoping to meet my neighbors properly." Her face went through several expressions before settling on confused politeness. "Eleanor, I didn't realize you lived in the neighborhood." "Oh yes, I just moved into the Colonial at the end of the lane. Lovely street, isn't it? Such a well-managed community." I smiled, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. The mayor chose that moment to approach, champagne glass in hand. "Eleanor, wonderful party. I was just telling my wife how nice it is to have someone of your caliber in Harmony Lane. The Morrison name carries such weight in this state." Jessica's face went pale. I watched the pieces clicking together in her mind. The name, the house, the obvious wealth on display. But she still didn't understand the full picture. That revelation would come later, when the real show began. The party was in full swing when I decided it was time for the evening's main event. I'd spent an hour working the room, reacquainting myself with old friends and making new connections. Jessica had been watching me from across the room, her confusion growing with each conversation I had with Connecticut's elite. I clinked my champagne glass with a silver spoon, and the room gradually quieted. The string quartet finished their piece and waited, their instruments poised. "Thank you all for joining me tonight," I began, my voice carrying easily across the room. "It's wonderful to be back among friends and to meet my new neighbors here in Harmony Lane." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I caught Jessica's eye and smiled. "Many of you knew my late husband Harold, and you've been so kind about his passing 2 years ago. What you might not know is that Harold and I built Morrison Holdings together, starting with a single duplex in 1980. I paused, letting this information settle. Today, Morrison Holdings is proud to own and manage some of Connecticut's finest residential communities. The mayor nodded approvingly. Several guests murmured their congratulations. Jessica's face had gone from pale to ashen. In fact, I continued, my voice warm and conversational, we're particularly proud of our newest acquisition, this beautiful development, Harmony Lane. We purchased it last year and have been working tirelessly to ensure our residents have the finest amenities and community experience possible. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as understanding dawned on face after face around the room. Jessica's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, like a fish gasping for air. So when I say I'm delighted to be your neighbor, I said, looking directly at Jessica, I mean that quite literally. There's nothing I enjoy more than being close to the people who matter most to me. The applause this time was more enthusiastic, mixed with surprised laughter and impressed murmurs. Several neighbors approached to congratulate me, to thank me for the improvements to the community center, to express their delight at having such a distinguished landlord. Jessica stood frozen in the middle of it all, still clutching her champagne glass like a lifeline. I made my way through the crowd toward her, stopping to chat with other guests along the way. When I finally reached her, she was standing alone. David and his wife had mysteriously disappeared to the buffet table. Jessica, dear, I said quietly, you look like you've seen a ghost. You own my house? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. I own everyone's house, sweetheart. The whole neighborhood. Every blade of grass, every mailbox, every perfectly manicured driveway. I sipped my champagne, savoring the moment. Didn't you get the memo about the new ownership? I'm sure the property management company sent something out. Michael handles all that. Ah, yes, Michael. How is my son, by the way? Still traveling for business? I let the question hang between us like a blade. Her face crumpled slightly. You're Michael's mother. Guilty as charged. Though I have to say, he's been remarkably quiet since I left your house. One might think he was avoiding something. The party continued around us, but Jessica and I existed in our own bubble of reckoning. I could see her mind racing, trying to process the implications of what she'd learned. The moving company, she said suddenly. You planned this. Oh, my dear girl, I didn't plan anything. You did that all by yourself when you decided I was ruining your aesthetic. I smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. I simply responded to the situation you created. What do you want? The question came out strangled. I considered this for a moment, swirling the champagne in my glass. What did I want? Revenge? An apology? My son back? I want you to understand something, Jessica. You threw away a woman who could have been your greatest ally. You discarded someone who built an empire, who had connections you couldn't dream of, who could have opened doors you didn't even know existed. I paused, watching her face. Instead, you chose to see a burden, a nursing home vibe. Tears were forming in her eyes now, but I wasn't finished. You wanted me gone to protect your image, your brand, your perfect little world. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. I'm gone from your house. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But I'm not gone from your life. I'm your landlord now, Jessica. I'm your neighbor. I'm the woman you'll see every morning when you check your mail, every evening when you come home from work. The weight of her situation was finally sinking in. She lived in my house, in my neighborhood, under my rules. The aesthetic she'd been so desperate to protect was now entirely at my discretion. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. I straightened up, smoothing my jacket. Now? Now you learn what it means to live with the consequences of your choices. And Jessica? I paused at the perfect moment. You might want to start thinking about how to make this right, because I have a very long memory, and I'm not going anywhere. The week following the party brought changes to Harmony Lane that Jessica couldn't have anticipated. Word had spread quickly through Connecticut's social circles about Eleanor Morrison's return to society, and suddenly our quiet suburban street became a destination. I watched from my front window as a steady stream of visitors arrived at my door. Former charity board members, business associates of Harold's, old friends who'd lost touch during my 2 years of grief-induced isolation. My house became the social hub of the neighborhood, with cars parked along the street and the sound of laughter drifting from my garden parties. Jessica's perfectly curated Instagram feed began to suffer. How could she photograph her serene morning coffee ritual when there were luxury cars parked outside her window? How could she capture her minimalist aesthetic when my vibrant flower garden was blooming just across the street, full of the chaotic colors she'd always criticized? But the real changes were more subtle and far more devastating to her carefully constructed world. The country club membership she'd been pursuing for 2 years, suddenly fast-tracked after I made a single phone call to the membership committee. Of course, they'd want to welcome the neighbor of Eleanor Morrison. I made sure Jessica received her acceptance letter the same day I received mine, welcoming me back as a lifetime member. The lifestyle brand sponsorships she'd been courting? Several companies reached out to me instead, interested in partnering with someone who had authentic influence rather than manufactured content. I politely declined, but not before mentioning that I had a daughter-in-law who was very interested in that sort of thing. The condescending tone in their responses when they looked up Jessica's metrics was audible even through email. Michael finally called on Thursday evening. I was in my garden, deadheading roses that were blooming in magnificent defiance of Jessica's monochrome preferences. "Mom," his voice was strained, tired. "Hello, son. How was Chicago?" "Don't." The word came out sharp. "Don't pretend this is a normal conversation." Jessica told me what happened, what you did. I continued pruning, the phone balanced between my ear and shoulder. "What exactly did I do, Michael?" "You know what you did. The party, the house, the whole performance. I threw a lovely welcome party for my new neighbors. I bought a beautiful home in a well-managed community. I'm not sure what you're objecting to." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Why didn't you tell me? About the money, the business, any of it? You never asked. In 2 years, Michael, you never once asked how I was managing financially. You never asked about your father's business or what he left behind. You just assumed I was helpless. That's not fair, isn't it?" I set down my pruning shears and gave him my full attention. "Your wife threw me out of your house like garbage, and you said nothing. You didn't return my calls, didn't ask where I was going to live, didn't seem to care whether I ended up on the street or in some cut-rate nursing home. I was traveling. You were avoiding. There's a difference." Another long pause. "What do you want from us, Mom?" The question hung in the evening air. What did I want? An apology that would never come? A relationship that might already be broken beyond repair? My son back, when he'd chosen his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity? "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," I said finally. "Your wife wanted me gone, and I'm gone. But I'm not the helpless old woman you both thought I was. I'm Eleanor Morrison, and I've spent 73 years learning how to survive in a world that underestimates women like me." Jessica feels terrible about what happened. Does she? Or does she feel terrible about what she's lost? He couldn't answer that, because we both knew the truth. "I have to go, Michael. The mayor's wife is coming by for tea, and I want to show her the new community garden plans." "Mom, wait." But I hung up. Some conversations end themselves, and some bridges burn from both sides. That night, I sat in Harold's rocking chair, looking out at Jessica's house across the street. The lights were on in what I knew was their bedroom, and I could see 2 figures moving around, probably having the kind of argument that happens in whispers and sharp gestures. Tomorrow, the landscaping crew would arrive to install the new community garden right at the edge of Jessica's property line, where she'd have a perfect view of the chaotic wildflower meadow I designed. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the woman who'd complained about my aesthetic would now have to look at mine every single day. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized something had shifted inside me. The anger was still there, but it was no longer the driving force. What had replaced it was something far more powerful. The knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged, living exactly the life I deserved. Jessica had wanted to erase me from her perfect picture. Instead, she'd freed me to paint my own. 3 months later, Harmony Lane had transformed into something neither Jessica nor I could have imagined that day she threw me out. The community garden was in full bloom, attracting visitors from neighboring towns who came to see the Morrison Meadow that had been featured in Connecticut Living magazine. The article, titled "When Wisdom Meets Wealth, Eleanor Morrison's Garden Revolution," included a photo of me standing among the wildflowers, looking every inch the successful businesswoman I'd always been. Jessica's lifestyle brand had quietly disappeared from social media. The authentic influence she'd been trying to manufacture couldn't compete with the real thing happening right across the street. Her last post had been 6 weeks ago, a generic quote about finding yourself, overlaid on a stock photo of a sunset. I was deadheading petunias on a crisp October morning when I saw her approaching. She walked slowly, hesitantly, like someone approaching a wild animal they weren't sure was tame. She was carrying something in her hands, a small, wrapped package. Eleanor? Her voice was smaller than I remembered, stripped of the confidence she'd wielded like a weapon 3 months ago. I looked up from my flowers, noting how different she looked. Thinner, tired, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "Good morning, Jessica. Lovely day, isn't it?" She glanced around at the garden, at the house that had become the neighborhood's crown jewel, at the life I'd built in the space she'd tried to erase me from. "It's beautiful. Everything you've done here, it's beautiful." I waited. "Some apologies can't be rushed. I brought you something." She held out the package with shaking hands. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." I set down my gardening gloves and accepted the gift. Inside was a small photo frame containing a picture I'd never seen before. Harold and me at Michael's college graduation, both of us beaming with pride. We looked so young, so full of hope for the future. "I found it in Michael's things," she said quietly. "He's been carrying it in his wallet for years. I thought you should have it." The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of acknowledgement. This wasn't just about the photo. It was about recognizing that I had a history, a significance, a place in the family that she'd tried to deny. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. We stood there in the morning silence, two women who'd wounded each other in ways that couldn't be easily healed. But sometimes, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live with the scars. "I was wrong," Jessica said suddenly, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them back for months. "About everything. About you. About what you meant to Michael. About what you could have meant to me. I was so focused on my image, my brand, my perfect little world that I forgot about the people in it." I studied her face, looking for the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, but found only exhaustion and genuine regret. "You were protecting something you thought was important," I said finally. "I understand that impulse, but I was wrong about what was important." She looked at the photo in my hands. "Michael hasn't spoken to me properly in weeks. He looks at me like he doesn't know who I am anymore, and maybe he doesn't. Maybe I don't either." The morning sun was getting stronger, warming the air between us. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood waking up, dogs barking, cars starting, the normal rhythms of suburban life. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing the question she'd posed at the party 3 months ago. This time, my answer was different. "Now you figure out who you want to be. Not for Instagram, not for sponsors, not for anyone else's approval. Just for you." She nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Is there any chance we could start over? Not forget what happened, but maybe try again?" I looked at this young woman who'd caused me so much pain, who'd forced me to rediscover my own strength, who'd inadvertently given me back the life I'd lost in grief. The irony was perfect. In trying to erase me, she'd helped me remember who I was. "I'm having a small dinner party next Saturday," I said. "Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors. You and Michael are welcome to join us." The relief on her face was immediate and overwhelming. "Really? Really? But Jessica?" I paused, making sure she was listening. "This isn't about forgiveness. This is about moving forward. What happened between us changed both of our lives. We can't undo that, and I wouldn't want to. But we can choose what we do next." She nodded eagerly. Yes, I understand." As she walked back to her house, my house, I reminded myself with a small smile, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. 3 months ago, I'd been a discarded old woman with nowhere to go. Today, I was Eleanor Morrison, successful businesswoman, beloved neighbor, and owner of one of Connecticut's most desirable residential communities. But more than that, I was a woman who'd remembered her own worth. That evening, I called Michael. This time, he answered on the first ring. "Mom? Hello, son. I wanted to invite you and Jessica to dinner next Saturday. Nothing formal, just family." The silence on the other end was different this time. Not avoidance, but surprise. "You talked to Jessica?" "We had a conversation. A real one this time. And I remembered something your father used to say. Ellie, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living so well that revenge becomes irrelevant." I could hear him breathing, processing. "I've missed you, Mom. I've missed us. I've missed you too. But Michael, we're not going back to the way things were. We're going forward to something better. I'd like that." After I hung up, I sat in Harold's rocking chair, looking out at the neighborhood I now owned, at the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of rejection. The woman who'd been thrown away for ruining someone else's aesthetic had created something far more beautiful than anything Jessica had ever posted online. I'd created a life worth living, on my own terms, with my own rules. And that, I thought, as the sun set over Harmony Lane, was the sweetest revenge of all. What would you do in my place? Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemies. It's in building something so magnificent that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the best way to win is simply to refuse to lose. The end.